Hey everyone, excuse the hot mess. I just got done working out, but I wanted to bring you another book review. I actually just finished it. Lynsey Sands' The Immortal Born is about backstory. Lynsey Sands' Argeneau novels is immortals finding their soulmates, or they call them life mates because they live such a long time. And this man Magnus, it lives in England. He is a very old vampire, or they call themselves immortals, and they actually are offended when someone calls them vampires. He flies from London or England to Canada because his family is telling him that they found his life mate, and so he goes to over and to inspect it. And the way that he could tell if they're life mates or not, if he could immediately knows, like if he can't read her mind, if he can't control her, or if his dietary, like if he wants to eat and he finds himself eating again, or if his passions reawaken, he knows that that's his life mate. So he flies over to Canada thinking it's going to be an easy peasy ride, but it's not, of course, because then it would not be so entertaining. And then the girl, Allison, is who his life mate is. She actually already knows about vampires or immortals and knows about this world because her adopted son is an immortal, which backstory on that, her best friend / neighbor was immortal, and she was running away from these groups of rogue vampires, which is pretty much the bad vampires in this series. And they so her best friend's pregnant, she gives birth, but the rogue vampires find her, so she's like, here's my baby, take him. And she walked back to her house pushing an empty cart with like the blankets all up to make it look like the baby's in there. And she goes in, and the next thing Allison knows is the house explodes. So she's holding this newborn baby, and she's just hightailing it out there. And for 4 straight years, she's just jumping from one place to another because the rogues just keep finding her. And this poor little boy is only like 4 years old, and she only knows her as mom. And she's like having him feed off of her for the last 4 years because she doesn't know, well, she of course knows about blood banks, but doesn't know that there's a system where immortals can get blood from a Pacific blood bank, which is the Argeneau Enterprise blood banks. And so she's been having him feed off of her, so she's like really weak, and then she actually ends up breaking into a blood bank and trying to steal blood, but she's so weak that she actually falls and hits her head and ends up going to the hospital. And that's when Magnus drops off in Canada, and then he gets all this briefing, so they just immediately drive to the hospital. And she sees them and sees that their eyes are different. Their eyes glow like this silver, instead of like the blueness or the rims of the eyes, they're pretty silver. And so that's how you could tell that if someone's immortal or not. So she hightails it out there, drives back home. They end up following her because they could just easily go into a system and find out where she lives and everything, which is actually kind of creepy when you think about it. So they follow her home. She wakes up her son, and he gets like all offended that she left him because when he was sleeping, because at the end of the day he is only 4 years old. But she goes and tells him to grab all his stuff. She goes and grabs their go bags. And then the bad immortals actually break into their house and like tries to grab him. And the whole reason why they're running is because she's protecting him. They want the little boy, and it's kind of unclear at first of why. And then the Magnus and his buddy, which is, apologize, I kind of forget his name right now, Tybos, Tybo. But then, so they jump in, grab them, save them, and then they hightail it out there. She faints on the way because she's very weak, and they go back to the enforcer house. And then, like, so much stuff happens. She freaks out because she's being brought into this new place. She wakes up in this new place. So she's got, like, this lighter and hairspray emergency kit in one of her go bags, and she was about to blast up the whole place, which all of them are laughing at her because of it, which she gets offended over. And then they end up calming her, like getting into her brain and calming her down. But Magnus can't do that, and he gets all offended when Lucien does it. And then they have like a little sit down. She explains everything, and because she's like only human, taking care of a 4-year-old immortal. And then they end up training her how to be a proper mom to him, and she ends up falling in love with Magnus. She ends up getting turned on their wedding night, and little did Magnus know that she was actually like still holding her virgin card. And so when they finally get around to maritizing the marriage, he's like, oh, and then it heals every time, which kind of sucks. So he had to stay in her the whole time for like 30 minutes, which is kind of funny. That whole part, it's so wrong, but it's funny. And then I'm just gonna come out and say this is not okay for kids. You should be like at least 17 or older to read this. And it's totally nuts. And then they end up finding the bad guy. This part is the nuts part. They end up finding the bad guy, and she ends up getting kidnapped by Steven, which is the little boy's father. That's the reason why they're running and they're getting chased after. And he ends up kidnapping her and thinks that they're going to trade him for his son, because they didn't really realize that the relationship grew as like a mother and son relationship, because he's psycho. And then she ends up taking a sword, closing her eyes, and beheading him. And then Basha, Lucien's niece, which is appears in another one of these books, an earlier book, ends up just totally beheading the bad guy in this book, because he actually tortured her for centuries, and ends up killing her daughter. So she's like, hey, payback's a bitch. And she just swipes in and beheads him with like an axe, which is just horrific. Because these books are very, doesn't shy away from the details, but it is a great book. It has everything in it: love, action, anything you would want. It's a great read for anyone who is mature enough to read these books. The Lynsey Sands Argeneau Immortal Born, which is their latest Immortal book series. And I hope you enjoy it, just like I did. Thank you for reading. Bye!